All right, I'm BowmanShoota, back here again with Carleigh Morgan, and we're going to be diving into the World Esports Association, WESA, because that news dropped this week, and oh my goodness, the controversy and the craziness that has occurred in the news and everything like that. Like I just read an interview with Fallen about it, and from Luminosity, and it's kind of insane. But Carleigh, welcome back. How you doing?
Thank you. Doing well. I can still feel the shockwaves reverberating through the industry. This announcement has just been like cataclysmic. There's been a lot happening in the news cycle this week. It's been difficult to keep up with, to say the least.
Yeah, definitely. So basically, we wanted to create this video as because we've been talking all week about a lot of different topics, and again, yeah, as you pointed out, this news week has been insane for a lot of different topics. And the biggest one to kind of culminate the week is the WSA. And basically, for those of you that don't know and who have been living up under a rock, basically, it is an organization that has been created by people a part of ESL, kind of ESL, and then 8 teams in the Counter-Strike scene that are kind of big. Some of them are big, some of them are like not big, but they're in there. And they want to try to their premise is they want to try to create an organization to help stabilize rules and regulations and to make it more beneficial for players and teams and leagues and provide that growth. And I probably stumbled through that explanation because at the same time, which is kind of the point of this video, is they're very vague about a lot of things.
That's exactly right. And I think you touched on one of the biggest criticisms of WESA, in that structurally speaking, it positions itself and announces itself as an independent organization. But if you look at the executive members that comprise the top tier of its executive board, they're predominantly pulled from ESL or some of the other major CS:GO teams. So it seems like there are only very few individual interests being represented at the key policy making and issue deciding level of this organization. Now, that's not to say that it won't change in the future if they decide to admit or incorporate, more leagues or open up the opportunity for other individuals to join at the executive level. But I think right off the bat, you've identified one of the biggest issues with this announcement, that it's not an independent agent. It seems to have some very close ties and some very somewhat disturbing affiliations with ESL.
And what's crazy is there's been so much normal, like regular news coverage of this event that, like, my phone has been blowing up like since that announcement. Basically even from people in my personal life going, "What is this?" Or
Mm-hmm.
and like my one brother, who he's into politics, he likes that conversation, which is a good conversation sometimes, but there's other days where it's frustrating. He goes, "Isn't this awesome?" And I'm like, "No." I'm like,
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons that we're seeing it kind of cross um, kind of disciplines here and attract the interest and intrigue of major news outlets and people who wouldn't ordinarily have an interest in esports is because of this comparison to FIFA, right? That's
oh yeah.
FIFA is a very recognized organization, and so I think they've capitalized on that association to draw lines of correspondence to develop an analogy between WESA and FIFA that can register with the general public more widely and give them kind of a cultural touchstone to latch onto in trying to figure out, okay, what is WESA's larger goals and ambitions? What are their aims? How do they see themselves positioning themselves as an industry, as an organization in the esports industry, rather. But at the same time, there's a lot of problems with that association, as you can rightly guess, and as a lot of people have already pointed out. And even people in WESA are referring to themselves, as the FIFA of esports. But I think that suggests a really poor understanding of public relations
Yeah.
and strikes me as almost abundantly tone deaf as well, because FIFA is just rife full of embezzlement and bribery and racketeering and corruption and mismanagement. And the WESA announcement this week I just want to point out is coming on the heels of the announcement just yesterday, as reported by the BBC, that Domenico Scala, FIFA's head of auditing and compliance, is resigning in protest over some of the so-called reforms that FIFA has decided to adopt in light of his investigative probes. So I just think that's a really striking correspondence. I know FIFA as a very corrupt organization, and then sort of the tone deafness that WESA exhibits in comparing themselves to FIFA.
Yeah, it's been kind of rough, and one of the things that kind of highlights the comparison between FIFA is FIFA essentially does have a league to a point. You know, they have the FIFA World Cup and all that stuff. You know, and yes, there are sub leagues like the Barclays Premier League, and then there's the I'm forgetting it, and the guy at the pub the other day is going to yell at me for that. But the other one that they're the new WESA's chairman used to be a part of the European Soccer League or Football League or something like that. I forget which one.
It would be football. Yeah,
Yeah.
you might catch some flack for that. It's football over here.
So, um, but like you know, they run tournaments. They don't just regulate tournaments. FIFA runs tournaments, and the WSA, you know, says they're not there to run tournaments. But you know, as Fallen said in his interview, he goes, "I don't see how they can not have that as their end goal. Like how do you have try to want to have that much power without being at least able to show a direct example of it?" And yes, they're utilizing ESL's Pro League to start out with and everything like that. But at the same time, two of your board members are ESL executives. Like, and it's not like they stepped down from their ESL positions to run this organization to try to, you know, start a new venture. That would have been outstanding. No, they're still at ESL.
That would have been the sort of third party, unaffiliated, independent organizing body we need as a regulatory agency. But yeah, you're exactly right. The fact that they're still so closely affiliated with ESL, or in fact, their positions haven't changed at all in ESL, means that there's a direct conduit through the same individual from WSA straight back to ESL. In fact, their executive board right now, I think, is only 5 members, and 2 of those members are ESL execs. Yeah, and in addition to that, if you look at the structure on their Twitter feed, I don't think they have this on their website. They may have published it earlier, but it's not available anymore. So if you check their Twitter feed, they have an image of kind of a structural breakdown of their organization.
Yeah.
And Thorin already touched on this in his video, but very ominously, it's structured as a pyramid with all of the power consolidated at the top, and then they have these arrows kind of vaguely point off shooting out to the side where there's like a player's board. But yeah, how those power relationships actually work in practice and how the hierarchy translates in day-to-day decision making is one of the big questions.
Yeah. Shoot, now I completely lost my thought, but that's all right. I do have to wonder overall, like, I was reading the MVS press release as far as why they joined WSA. And he made a good point in a little bit of defense of WSA that apparently there have been over a long time ago talks between teams, between players to try to get a type of organization like this started. And he makes a good, fair point that in the day-to-day managing of your teams and your players and the travel and having multiple teams, it's very difficult to slot aside separate time to put together the organizational structure and the lawyers and all that stuff to get an organization like this going. So I kind of understand how they reached out, and I'm sure they did reach out to more than just ESL. They would have to, unless it just happened to work out. Their first conversation, ESL was like, "Hell yeah, we'll do this." But I do understand that point of getting another company. It would have probably been better to not have a league, but at the same time, what other organizations are there other than developers, leagues, and teams to put together this structure to try to get this off the ground? And who knows? Maybe WSA will be successful in the long run, and maybe they'll get past this initial stumble of garbage that they threw out PR wise, and actually do some good in the scene long term. But at the same time, there's too many things that don't make sense to where it's fine that ESL put together this structure and stuff like that, but at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
they probably shouldn't have as many people on the board, in my opinion.
Mm. Well, I just want to comment on your. You mentioned the Team NVS's response, sort of their manifesto of reasons for agreeing to join WESA, and your point about individual teams not having enough time or resources or legal horsepower to set up an organization like WESA is very valid. And to WESA's credit, there was an interview with who was it? James Franken, is that right? You need to look up his name. Hold on.
Probably. I'm the worst with names. I apologize.
James Lampkin,
Okay.
and he actually did identify that as one of the struggles, that this isn't an organization that you can set up overnight, and in addition to that, it's not an organization that you can really set up just through Skype conversations or networking through tech platforms. You actually have to meet people face to face. You have to pitch the ideas to them. You have to devise the infrastructure and develop the organization face to face over repeated meetings, and it takes a lot of invested time and effort and resources, and just the opportunities for collaboration like that when teams are busy running their own enterprises are very few and far between.
Yeah.
So I think that is a valid consideration to keep in mind when we're critiquing the structure of the organization at the executive level. But while we're on the subject, I think one of the other kind of condemning and very spot on critiques I find is that this organization, in its name, like the core part of its mission, is to be a global federation for esports. It's
Yeah.
the world, it's a global organization, and we have a predominantly North American organizational structure. Those are the interests being represented.
And actually, to kind of counter that, most of the teams on there are European, and the ones that
Oh, that's right. Sorry.
are North American have all European players and a lot of coaches. Like I get it. Yeah, you're right in pointing out that they stated that the World Esports Association, and they want that global effect. But it would have been a heck of a lot better if their initial announcement had more teams on a global scale. I look at, oh, what is it? Shoot, you made a point earlier, and now I forgot it, but that's all right. But it would have been nice if, as these supposed 18 months of talks were happening, and I know Richard Lewis mentioned in his video that he was behind, at a pub at an actual like tournament, and a bunch of these guys got together for a secret meeting, and then they kind of asked him to leave because
Mm-hmm.
they were at a public place trying to have a secret meeting, and apparently it was about
Mm-hmm.
WASA. But at the same time, like, I would have almost, like, from a PR standpoint, instead of keeping it 100% hush hush, I would have almost said, hey, or have the teams go, hey, we're actually trying to put together something, like this, and it's got players that are actively involved, it's got leagues and developers actively involved, and we're reaching out to people across the entire world, to try to put together a proper organization. We'll release more details, as it develops, but we're at least having those talks. And the fact that there was only leaked rumors from journalists who their job was to investigate these things, and followed up by blatant denials from all these groups, I think hurts them as well, because it feels more shady, more backroom, more.
What do you mean? Do you mean in terms of openly extending the invitations to a myriad of organizations and leagues and teams across the spectrum globally,
Yeah, to have a little bit
and
more
having them
public
like having the
discourse.
announcement? Yeah, exactly. I
Like,
completely agree.
it's a weird tangent, but like in the gaming industry recently, not esports, just the gaming industry by itself, there's been a big push towards alpha and beta testing publicly, which has actually made games better, and fans are more invested in the games, and sales have skyrocketed. You look at a game like Ark Evolved Survival, which apparently is trying to be an esport now. It's a dinosaur game essentially, but but
Let's hope
they
it doesn't go extinct.
right, turning radius. It's all about turning radius. That's
Yeah.
a shout out to a YouTuber I watch a lot, but he believes turning radius is why the dinosaurs went extinct, because when they were trying
Well,
to escape from
because of
things.
thought that's just going to be a joke about their dwarf T-Rex arms, but
that too. But no,
moving on.
it's one of those things where the versus holding the game secret and tight and only doing limited release, that active involvement of the community on a huge global scale actually made it better, made those games better, made them more enjoyable. They got bugs fixed, they had better features on launch day, and lots of big organizations, including, you have Battlefield, which is EA, and they've started doing that more and more often, and their games have gotten better because of that. And so you got to wonder, that concept that's already in gaming, that's so successful, having that community driven feedback at least and development, why wouldn't they take advantage of that huge knowledge base that the esports community has, at least as far as growing this scene?
I mean, I think one of the crossovers between beta testing and the announcement of WESA that I think is an interesting, bizarre, but still profitable analogy to draw is that it kind of outsources a lot of the work to the community, but the community is very willing to spend the time and money to kind of play, to test the playing field, whether it's a game or whether it's designing the structure of a regulatory federation that's going to monitor the growth of the esports industry. I mean, you need to allow a transparent and ongoing dialogue to occur. You're very right, so that you can generate feedback, take that feedback into consideration, incorporate it into your model, and continue to work towards the best possible product that you can put together, which in this case, if you keep negotiations completely behind closed doors and you barricade people out of those discussions, they're going to feel very disenfranchised. They're going to feel, very slighted. It's going to cause a lot of bad blood and potentially negative reactions when you do finally make the announcement, because people are going to be evaluating, your organization with a degree of skepticism. Why didn't I get an invitation? I feel I have a lot of insight to offer, a lot of, not me personally, but speaking from the position of teams who on Twitter openly acknowledge they were never approached by anyone from WESA, and maybe feel like they ought to have been. I think if these negotiations were open, it would have been a bit better. The news would have been received in a more positive light. Now, understandably, it does make the negotiations more difficult. The more people you have, at the negotiating table, the more voices you have to take into consideration, the more compromises you have to come up with, and potentially the more you have to compromise on. But I think, given how grassroots the esports industry is, and how there are so few precedents set in terms of regulation, and given how dedicated fans can be, they can be, passionate to the point of hostility if there's something that they don't like about how an organization operates. I think people at the level of CFO, CEO, really need to respect the collective power and the synergy that a reaction from the community at large can generate. And it can break your organization, it can condemn it, or it could be the industry push you need from the bottom up to really collect a lot of that support and kind of bird you from the bottom up instead of just influencing from the top down.
Yeah, and it's funny because, like, part of the reason why I wanted to start these videos is to try to break that barrier between the traditional business world and esports. And a lot of it's almost like some people in esports have blinders on as far as practices that are successful and work in other industries, and they don't they just ignore the fact that they're there, and they can just steal them and use those concepts and those ideas, and this whole premise of not just like it's a manager concept. Like, yes, say you and I were managers of a project, and we both make about $100 an hour, and we can do a certain task perfectly, but we also have bigger and more important things to take care of than a menial task that we could hire, say, 4 people at $12 an hour to do the same job perfectly. And the cost effectiveness, essentially, is it's going to be way less expensive to pay 4 people $48 an hour than 2 of us $200 an hour to do essentially the same job. And so there's tons of these resources out there between people, and you don't have to pay them. The community has done all of this for free, you know, for so much. I mean, look at Unreal
I mean,
Tournament.
I just want to stop you there. I
Yeah.
don't necessarily think that that should be an entrenched and immutable and established part of the
No, no,
esports
you're
industry. I
you're
think
right. Yeah.
a lot of the work that people do for free, they do because they love esports and they realize it's a fairly nascent industry when, in terms of it being a larger culturally recognized global phenomenon. So they're willing to put that energy in to advance it. But at a certain point, there we need to draw a line and make sure that everyone is getting fair, um, payment in whatever form for their efforts.
Absolutely. And Unreal Tournament, the most recent version of it, because like I grew up playing Unreal Tournament. That's where my competitive gaming scene starts. And the most recent version of that game is completely crowd developed to the point where everyone, like the people who have done an outstanding job have actually now gotten jobs with Epic Games when they initially started doing it free. And I think like in this level, the people that stand out, that rise up, that contribute a lot into the success of an organization like the WSAA should then maybe be given, some sort of position to help facilitate it better. They may not be given a decision making position,
Right,
but
but just have some operational leverage,
yeah,
right?
which actually brings up an interesting point. I think in one of their statements they said they were a nonprofit. But when you look at their official registry as far as a business in Switzerland, it doesn't say nonprofit. Like it says they're an
So
association.
yeah,
Like
I think um, so. I think the business registration document is in German. Is that right?
yeah. And so
And
yeah, I
yeah,
had to
they're a
Google
company
translate it, but
registered,
yeah.
yeah, registered in Switzerland, um, and I don't think they came willingly in terms of distributing this document to the public. I think someone maybe did some investigative sleuthing and through the detective work managed to find it and post it to Reddit or similar platform.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think when you look at the structure of the organization, you were talking about uh, the having operational leverage. Um, and yes, they might announce themselves as a nonprofit, but I think we need to take that with a grain of salt and a healthy dose of skepticism because as we know from the constant FIFA comparison, there are ways to get around that loophole and still make a ridiculously lucrative profit off of your status as a nonprofit if you find ways to funnel money through other channels.
Yeah.
In addition to that, if you look at the structure at the executive level, the rights of the players that are supposedly, a core and central concern and one of the whole reasons driving the formation of this association, they seem to be lacking any operational leverage whatsoever. In fact, there are two mediating bodies. One mediating body before you even get to the executive level that is supposed to apparently take the players' concerns into consideration and then deliver them to the exec board, which raises the question: if WESA is essentially about the players, then why don't they have any operational leverage and representation at the highest level of the hierarchy, even in the guise of a single individual representing the whole of the WESA Players Association interest?
Yeah. Like and they did that for the teams, which is weird why they wouldn't do that for the players, because they put the two other board members as, team elected representatives. So why can't that player council that they call it or whatever be a part of that board and make it a board of 6, then with a chairman or something like that? Um, I agree with you. It's a weird structure to where, and I get it. They defended it saying we're not trying to be a players union. I mean, they agree that that should be a completely separate organization on itself, which I agree with that. But like, if they're gonna try to tote around power, because they mentioned standardizing player contracts. Well, the only reason we have standardized player contracts in other sports is because of player unions. So for an organization like this to try to do that and to try to play off that they're not trying to have a player union and the player council is just like an advisory board essentially, or it's like before they pass something they're like, hey, this is what we're passing tomorrow, so just wanted to let you know. Like
Mm-hmm.
it seems weird that they're trying to affect players on an individual level, but at the same time not give them some sort of power, or at least real power.
I think you're exactly right, and I think the reason that it seems weird is partly because of the leak, because they didn't have the control over how they were announced into the public eye. And so before they even made that official announcement, people were already viewing this organization with a heavy dose of skepticism, which I think has been applied then to really dissecting and diagnosing this gap between their rhetoric, between the way that they're talking about their missions and their goals, and how the player is incorporated into their corporate structure, versus how that looks on paper, how that actually is implemented from a practical perspective. You know, they say that they're about acting as an advisory board and taking input from players, and trying to get different teams to work together, and setting aside previous differences, and setting aside kind of historical grudges, and working together. And yet it doesn't really seem to be happening that way when you just take a very scrutinizing look at their structure.
And to kind of talk about a word we brought up in another video we did about regulation is transparency. And I agree with you that transparency is needed, but also not needed, and it depends on how, the different degree as far as how transparent you need to be. But like, when we ask those questions, like, well, how does the player council actually work in your organization? How are votes actually, it's almost like how when you learn about the government when you're growing up in elementary school. Like, we don't need complicated details. We just need to know, hey, this bill goes to the House first, and then it goes to the Senate, and then it goes to this, and you need a 2/3 majority. Like, give us at least some basic details to satisfy us for the time being. Like, we can deal with the legal jargon later, but like, I think that's a huge missed opportunity where they didn't really even give us that basic info of, hey, if this group wants to pass a regulation, what's the general process? Not just, hey, these people kind of have an influence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, one of the questions that keeps coming up again and again, albeit in different formats, is, what is going to convince us that the WESA isn't going to simply be another attempt by a company to get a stranglehold on the esports market because they view it as a viable economic opportunity? How are they going to convince us that that's not really their ulterior motive? And if you look at their replies, whether it's from the AMA they conducted on Reddit recently, I think it was on the Counter-Strike Global Offensive subreddit,
Mm-hmm.
Or you look at some of the interviews that have been kind of piecing together information about this organization. They have this tendency to not answer the question directly, as you noted. They circumlocute, and they slightly change in their responses, the way that they answer the question. It makes it seem as if they're addressing the central concerns of the question, but in fact they're addressing kind of a tangential concern, or they're employing a slew of buzzwords that sound really meaty and substantial, but when you break it down, there isn't quite a lot happening there. And I think if you just look at the fact that they offered to do a Reddit AMA, it speaks volumes about how they want to control and manipulate the media's reception to their announcement as an organization. The typical structure for an AMA is, on Reddit, you submit a question. So for those of you who don't know, AMA is Ask Me Anything, and it's just a Q&A session facilitated by Reddit. And you submit, your post, I'm WESA, Ask Me Anything. Typically, then you'd have commenters who would ask a series of questions, and WESA would reply to those. Except that they have submitted an AMA with, a bracketed kind of wall of text at the beginning that is sort of designed to anticipate any of the persistent questions they think that they would encounter, and then responds ahead of time to those questions. So I think I just want to take a second to really deconstruct what's happening here, with the way that they've chosen to manage from a PR perspective this AMA. So when they do something like this, they're basically controlling the terms of the conversation, right? Any of the central questions that could be asked, they will point back up to the top of the AMA and say, oh, we've already addressed your central concern here. Not only that, but they get to decide, what sort of rhetoric is constituted as credible and appropriate, and what they will acknowledge is the right way to talk about their organization. They also sort of are reframing the dialogue that way. So when you come to an AMA, you're not staring at a blank slate thinking of all of the questions kind of iteratively generating in your head. You're thinking about, your replies to the questions they've already seemingly answered. So it's almost like a distraction technique where they're shifting the core of the conversation in a way that gives them prevailing control over how the terms of that conversation is conducted. And not to mention the fact that they aren't obligated to answer any of the questions on the AMA, and they've been catching a lot of criticism and a lot of heat from individual Redditors about this. And if you're interested in this at all, for those of you watching, I highly encourage you to review that discussion, because there are some really interesting encounters there and some very necessary questions being asked.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things where, like, and my opinion on Reddit is weird, because I got into the Reddit world way later than a lot of people. I'm talking like 7 months ago. So, and when I first heard about AMAs, I thought of them as an interesting idea for someone to be completely and open and honest about something, and but not as like an announcement PR stunt. Like if I was the WSA and I was going about, and yes, the images were leaked on Reddit, my first announcement would be, hey, don't worry about it. We'll announce everything soon. And I would announce everything through my website. And if they had questions, there'd be like an FAQ of the most generic questions, and there'd be links to submit us questions, and you could have a team, reply and stuff like that. But to do a Reddit AMA as your form of trying to quell the masses, essentially, or to calm the masses, I'm using wrong words, I apologize, but just seems backwards thinking, in my opinion, because if you're trying to calm the masses, going to Reddit is not where you want to go.
I think to kind of get inside their heads a little bit, they must have been thinking, I don't necessarily think that it's a bad idea, because they're trying to engage community input in a way, and that was one of the main platforms that kind of promoted a lot of attention towards the leak. And so it's a great way to actually access a large community of people with very little effort, as opposed to redirecting everyone to your website. Everyone's very engaged on Reddit, and there can be a community dialogue that happens where you can address a lot of questions and hopefully quell a lot of concerns as well. But the downside to that is if you're not direct, if you're not transparent, if you don't give straightforward answers, then it can stimulate a very irate reaction from the community. And if you cherry pick and choose the questions to suit, the positions that you want to espouse, or I wouldn't go so far as to use the word propaganda, but if there are certain political positions or PR buzzwords that you want to introduce into your answers, you can choose the questions that might allow you to do those things.
Yeah.
So I think it's a very great promotional tool, and it does allow a lot of really cool intersectional and open dialogues to happen, but it does have its downsides. And in this case, I think it pretty heavily backfired, because we can see the way that WESA is cherry-picking questions, or giving very long-winded answers and circumlocuting around the original question, or reframing the terms of the original question, or sort of playing the idiot and kind of maintaining a position of ignorance on, well, what do you mean by concerns over corruption and player representation? So I think if I were in their position, I would seriously be developing a new and very robust PR strategy to deal with the backlash.
Yeah.
But I think that also speaks to the fact that the community at large, like the esports community generally, people feel they have a personal stake in it, and they feel very close to it. They want their visions represented, and a lot of people who've been here for a decade or so see this type of organization, an organization like WESA, as a corporate intervention with very questionable, if not outright shady intentions. And I think they're expressing a little bit of naivete and not at least acknowledging that there's that constituency of esports fans that exists, and also in not taking the esports community into consideration when it's crafting its PR approach or when it's thinking about how it's going to answer questions. I mean, I think clear and direct responses are key here.
Yeah, no, and I definitely agree with that. And it was interesting because I was thinking just now about how traditional esports communities have grown. It all started, and you mentioned the people that have been around for 10, 15 years, which I'm apparently one of those people. So I got had some,
You've been designated as old fart. I don't
yeah,
know
basically. So
when your sticker's coming in.
um, but and I think back to how our the community I was a part of, Frag Nation, grew, because initially we weren't going to be called Frag Nation. We were literally just a couple guys who hosted some servers for people to play a certain mod. And eventually someone created a forum called Zark Community, because Zark was the name of the mod we used for it to play an Unreal Tournament competitively. And eventually it grew, and we hit about a couple hundred members, but it was still grown by the community. And then once we hit a couple hundred members, we were like, holy crap, this is kind of growing. And so
Mm-hmm.
we rebranded into Frag Nation, and then expanded to multiple games, and expanded the community to where, by the time I left that community, it was over 8,000 members. But at the same point, like, the people in charge of that community and running the tournaments came from your players. And so there was that inherent trust that the people in charge were actually, doing so in your best interest. And there was open dialogue because you had your forums and you had people in charge responding to your inquiries and stuff like that. And that's completely different than your traditional sports structures and your traditional leagues that have been established for a lot longer, because maybe that was like it 100 years ago when baseball and football and soccer and all that was developing into leagues and stuff like that. But
I actually no, I don't think so. I think one of the features of esports is that we have the technology to afford communication instantaneously. So I think the internet has been a key part of the very particular type of community that's developed around esports.
yeah, so it's just it's interesting, because when you're used to growing up with that type of communication and dialogue, especially in the community you've spent years growing, and all of a sudden you feel like, as you pointed out, that your personal stake, your opinion doesn't matter anymore because some group is coming in and just overriding everything. It is scary to a point. And I think that does. Wow, losing my
Yeah, I
thoughts
think. I mean,
again.
I
But
think.
yeah, go
Yeah, I
ahead.
think what you're sort of alluding to is that it's the esports, it's undergoing meteoric growth, and people are a little bit skeptical or apprehensive of change in any form, even if it's for the best. Um, there is that very kind of evolutionarily primed reaction to fear the unknown. So you're
Yeah,
touching on to kind of you know a collective feeling, like an emotional part of the esports zeitgeist that I think we definitely see in the response to the WESA announcement.
yeah. Now, I don't want to completely write off the WSA, because
Mm-hmm.
if they can be effective, and I think if they can be effective, and let's start with some of the basics. They talked about getting a standardized player contract. And I think a standardized player contract would and you can check out my video I did with Roger Keeles, where we talked all about contracts and stuff like that, and we made some good points there. But um, having a contract that the players take a look at and they go, yeah, that's fair. It doesn't have to be exciting. It doesn't have to be like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. I get, I'm taking these people, for everything they have. I think if they
Mm-hmm.
have the reaction, yeah, that's fair. I think we've hit a success at that point. So if they can do these little things initially to say, hey, this is what we want to be a standard player contract, and like with the ESL Pro League that they're going to be first putting under these regulations or whatever, and they can show, hey, these are the things we're standardizing, these are the things we're trying to regulate, and all the teams that are in the WESA and not in the WSA have all gone, yeah, that's fair. I think that'd be a win.
I agree with you, and I actually think that most people who are criticizing WESA right now would be in agreement with that statement. I don't think that the criticism is coming from the perspective of not wanting those things to happen. I think the criticism is coming from the point of view of not expecting those things to happen,
Yeah.
because they're, I think we're at the point now. It's still, only not even a week after the announcement, but
It was Friday.
WESA, yeah, right. WESA is doing damage control already and has a lot of, changing hearts and minds and convincing the esports community that its interests are noble and pure and, well, maybe not necessarily pure, but overwhelmingly positive. Um, so I completely agree with you that standardizing player contracts and establishing regulations for industry-wide fair labor practices, having some baseline for what constitutes fair pay, having caps on how many hours pro players can train per week, having an off season so that players can recuperate and recover and, get all the sports physiotherapy they need to prepare for the next season. Great ideas. However, I don't think that I'm in a position right now to really be convinced by WESA's ability to affect those changes.
Yeah.
And one of the things I want to point out is that, they say, quote unquote, WESA represents the interests of players by including them in the decision-making process. So if you're talking about something like a player contract, I would think that a player ought to have a pretty big say at the decisions made at an executive level. But as we've already touched on, that doesn't seem to be the case. So there's this discrepancy between WESA as a public PR instrument versus WESA, behind closed doors at the corporate decision making level. There's just something that doesn't quite add up.
Yeah. Now, another thing I kind of want to talk about as far as like maybe a possible positive outcome of this whole ordeal is, and I'm going to go back to that envious article a little bit of the
Yeah.
idea of trying to help grow the industry and ways they can impact it. And I do agree with the whole profit sharing idea as far as that would be an opportunity if, because like, yeah, smaller teams, smaller players don't really have a lot of ways to sustain their lifestyle, even if they are talented. And say they do qualify for these tournaments, but they're placing in, they're not placing in the top four. They're placing in the bottom eight or that fifth through eighth position, which in itself is still pretty solid of a placing considering how many players there actually are. For you to finish top eight in a tournament at the highest level is pretty good, but at the same time there's not a lot of they're limited with just the prize money as far as it being a sustainable career in the long term, and getting tournament organizers to do a little bit of profit sharing to a point to these players for like an attendance fee or something like that, to allow these smaller teams that they lucked out and they qualified for these big tournaments, would be useful actually, I think, because that way then it kind of evens the playing field, at least on that side point, where the prize money still goes to the best teams, but then it allows these smaller teams to grow financially still, to be able to maybe afford trading a player to getting a better player, or spending more money on developing better players, because the whole development side of esports is still very lacking as far as developing talent. It's more of finding talent and trying to gobble them up as fast as you can. And I guess I probably shouldn't have said him there, because I do think there are outstanding female talents that need more spotlight, which is a whole nother video that I'm sure we'll do, because I already have you have want to do a video on that, and I got like 4 other people who have all said, yeah, we want to do a video on that. So but growing that opportunity with the profit sharing is, I think, a good idea, but they need more tournament organizers on board in order for that to really be effective, because having only ESL on board isn't effective. And I do know the ECS, through Face It and stuff like that, they have that profit sharing built into their tournament a little bit, which is good to see. But like, even if you could get the ECS and this WSCA to work together, would be a huge step in the right direction. And maybe then getting the E-League on board, if you're sticking with Counter-Strike to initially or whatever they're doing, and considering DreamHack is under the same parent company as ESL, why isn't DreamHack involved? Like
Yeah,
little
I
things
mean,
like that need to be there that would have made this announcement so much better for them.
yeah, I think the question of who was approached under what circumstances and what the story is, regarding, um, whether people who identified that they weren't approached actually wanted to be part of the organization, or if there were discussions happening behind closed doors and established that they would be excluded from the WESA organization is a central question. Um, but yeah, I think you're right that there are definitely some positive things to consider about. I mean, what WESA is trying to accomplish fundamentally is a really good thing, and I think there's this asymmetry in esports right now where, from a financial perspective, from if you look at betting, if you look at underage betting or skins betting,
Yeah.
if you look at the level of individual sponsorship, if you look at the kind of multinational corporations like Coca-Cola, or Red Bull or Bud Light, who want to invest in this as a market opportunity and attract a millennial audience, there are some really amazing opportunities for an absolutely staggering amount of growth. However, what we're seeing is that, from a development perspective and from, a regulatory and legal perspective, the industry is really lagging behind. It's struggling to keep up, and it's playing a game of kind of reactionary catch up versus like a proactive stance on trying to get ahead of the industry and shape it from the other side.
Yeah.
And I think I see a little bit of that asymmetry in some of the goals that WESA is articulating and some of the goals that they're not articulating, some of the things that people suspect they've been organized to accomplish but aren't ready to publicly admit.
Yeah. God, this is sorry. I'm just my brain went to 10 different places again. Sorry.
It's okay, totally fine. There's just so much to say on the subject.
Yeah, because I mean, like it's frustrating because like overall, all of our initials reaction was we need a company like this in esports to be. I mean, like we were talking about in our regulation video about how Riot is the judge, jury, and executioner essentially, or maybe not executioner, but that's probably not the right word. But
Well,
there's
executing a decision, right? Not
yeah,
necessarily an individual.
yeah. So, but like having that third party organization in place to actually to be that unbiased and fair judge essentially, or reviewer, or whatever the proper words are. I'm sure you know the better words than
Just
me, but
just yeah, like an appeals court or someone who can mediate conflict as opposed to coming in from a legal perspective.
yeah, like we need that in the scene, and it's frustrating because it's like I'm sure WSA has those best intentions in mind, that they wanted this to be an outstanding and positive reveal. And I almost would say that if they weren't planning on revealing it this weekend, they probably should have just postponed it and kept their regular schedule. Like they shouldn't have scrambled and done whatever they did this Friday, because it was obviously a rush job on some level and a mess. But at the same time, like they could have handled it a lot better, and I
I
almost
mean,
wish this organization would have done it better because we need it.
I just want to kind of issue a bit of a kind of a devil's advocate statement, which
What's
is that
that?
I don't know that they were going to wait much longer to make the announcement. It seemed like it was pretty imminent.
Hmm.
The leak seemed only a few days off from their regularly scheduled announcement anyway. Although quite suspiciously, the individual who leaked the image that initially clued us in to the formation of WESA suspiciously called in sick to work the next day. At least
Yeah,
that was the
that.
explanation that someone on WESA's team offered. And again, I think very classically kind of skirted around the actual question, which was, did that individual get fired? So that's still up in the air.
Yeah. Because I bet they probably realized and went, "Oh crap! I probably don't have a job anymore." But so
Yeah, I don't know what happened there, but
yeah. But overall, I mean, where do we take from this weekend? I mean, we're recording this on a Sunday, literally 2 days after the official announcement of the WSA. What do we take from this weekend, and what can we look forward to?
I think I'm really hoping that this isn't just another effort to promote fair practices in the industry that ultimately gets aborted. Because we've seen a couple of these in the past, and unfortunately, it seems to be the case that esports is changing at such a rapid rate that these organizations are kind of feeble attempts to keep pace with the growth of the rest of the industry. However, I do think if we're going to talk about one of the overwhelming positives that has come out of the WESA announcement, it's that clearly we've established on a quite a global level, or at least on the level of national attention, that there is a tremendous need for this kind of organization at esports. Whether WESA can rise to those expectations and address some of our and the esports community's concerns remains to be seen. But at the very least, it's generating a lot of really constructive dialogue and, hopefully some productive action out of that dialogue in terms of what we really need to see as an industry. And I think the criticisms that have been laid out against WESA in overwhelming part have been justifiable and valid. And if not, I'm interested to see how WESA kind of confronts those criticisms and refutes a lot of them. So I think the stage is set, and where we go from here into the next week, into the next month, and into the next few years of shaping the esports industry, it's definitely going to be a space to watch, and I think people should feel very compelled to contribute to the discussion and to take action if you're standing around saying, where's the regulation in esports? Where's the organizing third body in esports that can act as that appeals court, that can act as the mediator?
Yeah. No, I completely agree. So time will tell if this is, as you said,
It
another
surely
feeble
will.
attempt. But is there anything else you wanted to cover? Because I don't mean to cut it off, but we're reaching another hour again.
Yeah, I know it's happened so fast.
Yeah.
Um, I guess the other thing I wanted to say, this again, it's not a personal project, but it's another video that we could certainly make together.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this WESA endorses inclusivity as one of its core tenets, right? That's another buzzword. And yet, we've talked about the structure from an executive perspective and where people's, organizational affiliations are in the CSGO scene. But I want to know where the women are.
Mm.
This organization, I mean, at a decision making level, at the level of policy, at the level of implementation, at the level of publicity, it's dominated by men. And there's very capable and very intelligent women who could be contributing to WESA, and I don't see mention of them anywhere. And I think that's a real concern. It's not just WESA. It's endemic to the esports industry as a whole. It's endemic to STEM fields, but I think it's something that we need to make, or I personally would make a central concern moving forward in terms of figuring out how to represent the concept of inclusivity at every level of my organization.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, because it's difficult, and maybe I don't know how it's done in other countries as well, but growing up, it's frustrating on a lot of levels because we see from athletic sports that men and female are separated into separate teams, separate leagues, and all that stuff. But gaming is one of those few things that shouldn't be separated. Like, there are outstanding players on both sides of the coin that can compete at the highest level and should compete together at the highest level. And we should definitely do another video on that. And it would be interesting to see how organizations like the WESA handles that type of situation, because the ESL, which is technically somehow involved in the WSA, has that league with Intel. That's the women's league and everything like that, which is great publicity, but we've not seen that crossover to where, why aren't the top players getting offers from the other CSGO teams that, why aren't they? They're just as skilled. They have the talent. They should be on those teams competing at the majors, at the biggest tournaments and stuff like that, because if they got the skill, they should be there.
Well, I don't want to speak from the position of representing all women, especially in the esports industry, but it's a very divisive topic. It's a very polarizing subject, and not every woman's going to be in agreement. I mean, there are certain people who advocate for strictly female tournaments, and they have very good reasons for taking that position. And then there are people who advocate for integration and having co-ed tournaments. And I think you're right in identifying that esports is one of those scenes where that's possible, because it's not necessarily about like dynamic bodily engagement and athleticism from that end of the perspective of the scale, but the perspective is much more about, strategizing and team cooperation and response times and reflexes and twitch skills. So I think that levels the playing field from the perspective of, the physical competitions that males and females can undergo. And there is an opportunity there in esports. But in terms of addressing the subject more comprehensively, we'll have to save that for another time.
Yeah.
But I just want to point out this doesn't just relate to the sphere of competition, right? My comment about women being represented and esports being inclusive is all the way up to the top level of WESA. It's 5 men. And I find that deeply problematic.
Yeah, and we will do that video, because it is an interesting topic that we'll probably spend another hour on, or maybe 2. Who knows? Maybe we'll do a
right.
live show of it and just talk forever. So,
I mean, it could be something that to dialogue about in terms of doing more kind of open-ended symposiums over a series. So that's something to think about. We don't have to necessarily restrict everything to 1 hour, or it could be something that I take it upon myself to organize. So the options are there. It's just a matter of figuring out how to do it.
Yeah, definitely. So, anything else as far as WSA that we need? Actually, to go back to your point, I did want to comment on that real quick, about the inclusivity. From the other side of more teams being involved, more players, more regions, because it is a fair point to bring up, the male-female dynamic, but at the same time, it's also, where are the other regions? I mean, I get
right.
it. There's Ace and Kespa that kind of dominate the Asian scene to a degree, but like Counter-Strike is still, if they're focusing on Counter-Strike initially, is still a fledgling scene in South Korea, in China. Like, China's finally starting to get going, but like, it would be prudent to have them involve those regions a little bit more to help that growth.
South Korea might be a horse of a different color, so to speak, because there's so much government subsidization and regulation and open support of the esports industry that a lot of what WESA is trying to do is probably inbuilt already into some of the government regulation, especially from the perspective of legality and contracts and all of that. So I think if we see WESA penetrating the South Korean esports scene, the model will be changed slightly, because South Korea is just its own entity when it comes to how it handles esports, from both a cultural and a governmental level. And I think these criticisms that we're talking about regarding inclusivity are also opportunities, right? Like, if WESA is thinking along the same lines we are, then moving forward, hopefully they'll be looking to integrate, more teams outside of the European circuit. Hopefully they'll be looking to integrate more individuals in powerful positions who aren't men, and who can speak to other interests and experiences in the industry.
Yeah, no, definitely agree. We need to, the whole scene needs to grow on many levels, and all we can hope is that an organization, if they really want to be successful, like WSA, that they take all these issues seriously and address them appropriately. Because I mean, we don't want another failed startup, because we're going to set a precedent at that point if all these groups try to form these third-party groups to try to get some regulation, to try to get some fairness and everything into the scene, and they all fail. Like, that's frustrating to a point if that ends up being the case again. So there is a little part of me that's kind of rooting for the WESA.
Yeah, so. I mean, and I think you see that even in Team Envious' their drafted essay today, and then Fallen's comments too, where he says he can't be naive about WESA, but you can still hope, and in that hope, if you are vocal and you critique what you find is kind of inappropriate about the organizational structure, or you offer critical commentary and feedback, somehow it'll get collectivized from the grassroots level, and hopefully people at WESA have their ear to the ground and they're taking all of this into consideration. So moving forward, I'm hoping to see them implement some of the changes and suggestions that a lot of people are discussing over the course of this weekend.
Nice.
We'll see.
Yeah, we will definitely see. It'll be exciting. An exciting time to be in esports. Just
Yeah.
so. All right. Well, unless you have anything else, I think that about wraps up
Yeah,
everything
we
we're going
should
to talk.
probably, yeah, even if I have other things to say, we should artificially wrap it up there, right?
Well, do you go ahead? I mean, I don't care
No, no,
about the
no,
length
it's
of
fine.
it.
I think we reached a decisive concluding point. So,
Cool. Um,
pleasure chatting with you as always.
yep, Carleigh, it's been outstanding the few times we've talked already, and I look forward to talking again. Viewers, like, share, favorite, subscribe to whoever posts this. Um, and share this as you see fit because it's a very important topic on all levels. And other than that, you guys all have a wonderful day.